June 4, 1944 dawned over the cold, choppy waters of the Atlantic. The USS Pillsbury, a Gleaves-class destroyer escort, cut through the waves on patrol. The crew alert, but unaware that today would test every ounce of courage they had. Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David, assistant engineering officer, leaned against the railing, scanning the horizon through the gray morning haze. They were hunting German submarines, but nothing in his training could have prepared him for what was about to appear. At 700 yards, a dark shape broke the waterline. A German U-boat, damaged and listing dangerously, emerged like a predator caught in the act. Its hull was scarred, metal bent and leaking oil, and the telltale hatches hinted at chaos inside. The crew of the Pillsbury froze. Every protocol drilled into them screamed one thing: destroy it immediately. The U-boat was rigged with demolition charges. Any attempt to approach could mean instant death. Boarding a sinking enemy vessel was considered impossible. The Navy had not attempted such a feat in over a century, not since 1815. Despite the danger, David felt a twinge of curiosity and responsibility. Orders were clear: engage, neutralize, and leave no chance for the enemy to escape. But there was something different about this U-boat. Intelligence reports had hinted at Nazi experiments and weapons projects, and this U-boat could hold secrets that might shift the war in the Atlantic. Commanders debated, radio messages crackled, and tension aboard the Pillsbury rose with every second the submarine lingered. 8 men volunteered, not because they were reckless, but because they understood the stakes. Every sailor knew the risks: open sea, explosives ready to detonate, and a vessel flooding faster than anyone had expected. The plan, if it could even be called that, was simple in words but deadly in execution. They would board the U-boat, gather what they could, and return before the submarine sank entirely. There was no room for hesitation. As the Pillsbury closed in, the waves slapping against the hull like drumbeats of fate, the crew could see German sailors moving frantically. Hatches were opened and closed, valves twisted to flood compartments, and the air was thick with smoke and tension. Each moment was a countdown. The U-boat's deck was slippery, covered in oil and seawater, and every footstep could send a man tumbling into the icy Atlantic. David gave the nod, and the first men prepared to jump. The approach seemed impossibly slow. The U-boat rolled and pitched, water slapping over the deck, and the sight of it made every instinct scream to stay back. Yet David, focused and calm, reminded himself that this was more than just a boarding mission. It was a chance to seize something extraordinary, to uncover a piece of history that might alter the war in the Atlantic. The clock was merciless. Every second the submarine sank further, and every movement of the German crew brought new danger. As the first sailor leapt onto the deck, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sound of boots striking metal, the splash of waves, the creak of the U-boat under their weight, it was all surreal. David followed, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Inside, the submarine was a maze of narrow corridors, valves, and ticking dangers. The team could hear the hissing of flooding compartments, the distant clatter of German equipment, and the occasional muffled voices of sailors who had given up hope. David realized that success depended not just on courage, but on precision. Every action mattered, every second counted. The U-boat could explode without warning. The men moved methodically, checking each hatch, each control, each compartment for signs of danger. The tension was almost unbearable, yet there was a strange clarity in the chaos. Every decision could mean life or death. By the time they reached the command room, the reality of the mission settled in. This was uncharted territory. No one had attempted this in over 129 years, and the weight of history pressed down on them. But David and his team pressed on, driven by duty, bravery, and a hint of curiosity that human nature could not suppress. They were not just boarding a submarine, they were stepping into a story that would remain secret for a year, a story so sensitive that thousands would hold their tongues until Germany surrendered. The minutes stretched like hours. Each corner revealed new dangers: flooding compartments, armed explosives, and the eerie presence of the enemy.
Yet David could sense the potential prize, a glimpse at the Nazis' hidden arsenal, plans that could change the tide of the Atlantic War. He and his men moved with silent determination, knowing that their actions could rewrite naval history. The impossible mission had begun, and neither the sea nor the enemy would make it easy. The wind whipped across the deck, the waves pounded the hull, and the U-boat shuddered with every rolling motion. But amidst the chaos, there was focus. Each sailor knew his role, every movement rehearsed in mind, if not in reality. They were the first Americans to attempt such a feat in more than a century, and their courage was matched only by the stakes. Success meant capturing secrets that could save thousands of lives. Failure meant instant death in the icy Atlantic waters. As the boarding continued, David could not shake the feeling that history was watching. This was not just a tactical maneuver or a daring raid. It was a moment where ordinary men confronted extraordinary circumstances, where training collided with improvisation, and where the margin between heroism and tragedy was measured in inches. The impossible was unfolding before their eyes, and the Atlantic bore witness.
The U-boat's deck was slick with seawater, oil, and the remnants of the stormy Atlantic swells. 8 American sailors, hearts pounding, moved carefully across the metal surface, each step a battle against gravity, fear, and the relentless pull of the sea. Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David led the way, every eye on the damaged vessel, every nerve alert to the faintest sound that could signal disaster. The ship groaned and rocked beneath them, threatening to pitch a man overboard at any moment. Inside the narrow hatchways, the air was thick and heavy with the smell of diesel, salt, and something acrid, smoke from damaged machinery. Water seeped in through cracks, pooling in the corridors, and the distant groan of the hull under the strain of the waves made every man tense. The U-boat was rigged with demolition charges, set to explode if the enemy lost hope or if the vessel sank entirely. Each step forward was a step into a carefully orchestrated trap, and the Americans knew it. One wrong move could mean instant death. As they advanced, David noticed the chaos left behind by the fleeing German crew. Valves had been opened to flood compartments rapidly. Equipment had been sabotaged. Lights flickered in the narrow corridors, casting long shadows that danced across the walls, making every object seem larger, more menacing. In this dim, claustrophobic environment, the boarding party moved silently, but with purpose. Their training told them what to look for: pressure points, detonators, weapon caches, but nothing could prepare them for the smell, the sounds, the claustrophobic terror of a submarine under siege. The team split into pairs to cover more ground, methodically checking each compartment. One sailor inspected the engine room, where the German machinery hissed and sputtered as water reached critical levels. Another checked the torpedo storage, noting carefully which were safe and which might still pose a threat. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and tense, because a misstep could trigger an explosion. David himself focused on the control room, knowing that information here could be invaluable. Instruments and charts were strewn about, some damaged, some still functional, revealing a glimpse into the enemy's operational plans. Outside, the Atlantic roared. Waves crashed over the deck, and the U-boat listed dangerously, rolling with each swell. A slip could send a man plunging into freezing water, leaving him to either swim back to the Pillsbury or perish. Yet the team pressed forward, driven by more than orders. They were motivated by the possibility of capturing intelligence that could save lives, alter strategies, and change the course of the war. This was not just about courage, it was about history in the making, and they were at its center. The further they went, the more the submarine seemed alive. Every metallic creak, every bubbling of water into compartments, every clank echoed ominously through the confined spaces. David's mind raced with calculations. How much time did they have before the charges went off? How quickly was the flooding spreading? Which areas had priority? And what secrets could be extracted before it was too late? They could feel the weight of history pressing down, the knowledge that no American sailor had attempted this in 129 years. Failure was not an option. Death was very real. As they reached the command center, it became clear that the Germans had left more than just sabotage behind. Charts, codes, and technical schematics hinted at secret projects and experimental weapons. David carefully documented and photographed what he could, while his team disarmed small traps and ensured that no explosive would detonate while they worked. Every moment was tense, every decision critical. A single miscalculation could not only destroy the submarine, but kill the boarding party instantly. In one corner, a valve that controlled a flooded compartment hissed and bubbled, threatening to engulf them. The men worked quickly, hands shaking, hearts racing, improvising solutions as the submarine shuddered beneath them. The scene was chaotic yet methodical, an orchestration of bravery, intelligence, and sheer instinct. David realized that the men around him were performing at the highest level of courage he had ever seen, each balancing fear with calculated action. The minutes stretched, and the U-boat continued to list. The team knew that their window was shrinking. Every second counted, and the pressure was immense. Yet, amid the chaos, there was a strange rhythm, a silent understanding between men who had trained for danger, but now confronted it in its purest, most immediate form. They were pioneers in a dangerous operation, facing a ticking bomb beneath the waves, moving steadily forward despite the odds. David and his team gathered whatever intelligence they could find, knowing it might be invaluable to the Navy. Documents, technical drawings, and machinery components hinted at the scale of the Nazis' secret projects. Every discovery carried weight beyond the immediate mission. It could influence battles, strategies, and lives across the Atlantic theater. The boarding was not just an act of bravery, it was a decisive operation that demanded precision, courage, and nerves of steel.
The interior of the U-boat was a maze of narrow corridors, bulkheads, and hissing pipes, and every step David and his team took brought them deeper into a world few Americans had ever seen. The dim lighting flickered against the wet metallic walls, creating shadows that danced and stretched with the sway of the sinking submarine. Water pooled on the floor, sloshing around their boots, and the smell of diesel, salt, and scorched metal filled the air. Every corner they turned could hide a trap, an armed German, or worse, the explosion of a demolition charge. In the control room, the reality of the mission hit them with full force. Charts and navigation logs lay scattered across the tables, some soaked in seawater, yet still legible. David carefully examined them, recognizing codes and coordinates that hinted at secret patrol routes, supply runs, and potentially experimental missions. It was clear that this was no ordinary U-boat. It carried knowledge that the Nazis did not want to fall into American hands. The weight of what they were uncovering pressed down on him. Every second mattered. Moving further, the boarding party discovered compartments filled with technical equipment, machinery that was unfamiliar, intricate, and purpose-built. Gauges, valves, and mechanisms suggested advanced experimentation far beyond the typical submarine designs of the time. Some devices seemed to be related to propulsion, others hinted at weapons that had never been publicly documented. David made mental notes, knowing the Navy would need these details for intelligence analysis, yet the flooding compartments reminded him that time was fleeting. The German crew had sabotaged sections meticulously. Water surged through flooded areas, and they had booby-trapped others. One wrong touch could trigger a charge. The men had to move carefully, using their training, instinct, and teamwork. It was a balance between speed and precision. The ticking clock of the sinking submarine was relentless, each footstep echoing like a heartbeat in the confined space. In a small storage compartment, they uncovered crates marked with codes and insignia that David immediately recognized as sensitive. Papers, manuals, and parts for weapons systems were packed tightly inside. The realization struck him.
If these materials fell into German hands again, or if the U-boats sank with them, entire Allied operations could be compromised. Their mission was more than daring, it was pivotal for the outcome of the Atlantic War. Every discovery heightened the tension. A faint noise, a pipe clanging, water splashing, sent a ripple of alarm through the team. They moved silently, communicating with gestures, knowing that any careless sound might alert the Germans who remained aboard or trigger a trap. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning, a labyrinth that demanded focus and courage. And all the while, the U-boat groaned under the weight of the waves, listing more with every passing minute. David paused in the radio room. Equipment that had been carefully preserved for clandestine transmissions hinted at codes and communication methods that had eluded Allied forces for months. If captured and studied, this information could provide a crucial advantage in intercepting enemy movements. It was a revelation. The U-boat was more than a vessel. It was a mobile command post and intelligence hub designed to carry secrets that Hitler himself considered vital. The closer they came to the forward compartments, the more dangerous the environment became. Torpedo tubes, still armed, loomed in the darkness, each one a potential death trap. Water rushed in through the lower decks, and the metallic groaning grew louder, as if the submarine itself were warning them to leave. Yet the men pressed forward, documenting, photographing, and carefully collecting what they could carry. Every object they saved could be a key piece of intelligence. Every second lost increased the risk of disaster. In the command area, David found journals and logs detailing patrol routes, encounters with Allied convoys, and the U-boat's operational history. Each page told a story of strategy, desperation, and secrecy. He understood that these documents would be invaluable to the Navy, not just as intelligence, but as a glimpse into the enemy's planning and mindset. The pressure to secure them intensified as the submarine continued to settle further into the Atlantic, its flooding accelerating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the team gathered their most critical finds. Documents, machinery, and small components that could be quickly removed were bundled carefully. They paused to take a breath, acknowledging the danger surrounding them. The U-boat was still rigged to explode, still flooding, and still unpredictable. Every sailor was acutely aware that they were standing inside a vessel that could be their tomb at any moment. Yet their courage held, driven by the knowledge that what they were carrying might change the war. As they prepared to leave the lower compartments, David looked back at the confined space, now aware that it held secrets that no Allied sailor had ever seen. The U-boat had been more than a target. It had been a vault of Nazi ambition, ingenuity, and desperation. The boarding mission had revealed the unimaginable, and yet it was only part of the story. The men were about to take their prize back to the deck, facing one final stretch of danger. And in doing so, they were about to accomplish what no American had done in over a century. The secrets below deck would not remain hidden much longer, but the price of retrieval was still dangerously high.
The climb back to the deck felt longer than any mission David had experienced. The submarine lurched and pitched violently, water rushing into lower compartments, threatening to sweep the men off their feet. Each step had to be calculated, deliberate, because one slip could mean falling into the icy Atlantic. The stormy wind whipped across the deck, waves crashing over the hull, and the taste of salt and fear filled every sailor's mouth. The U-boat was alive with danger, but the team carried what mattered most, the intelligence that could change the course of the war. As they reached the open air, David paused for a brief moment, scanning the horizon. The Pillsbury had held position, engines humming steadily, waiting to receive its heroes. From below, the groaning of the submarine reminded them of the limited time they had. Every second counted, and the knowledge that the U-boat could explode at any moment pressed heavily on them. The boarding party moved quickly, careful not to disturb the explosives, while simultaneously hauling the most critical documents and equipment back toward safety. The American sailors aboard the Pillsbury watched in tense silence. They knew the risks their comrades had taken. They understood that what was happening on the deck of that sinking enemy submarine was unprecedented. No one had boarded an enemy vessel at sea in more than 129 years, and the weight of history was evident in every face. As David's team transferred the intelligence and equipment to their ship, a quiet sense of awe spread among the crew. Courage, precision, and nerves of steel had just rewritten naval history. Once aboard, David and his men began cataloging the captured materials. Documents, technical schematics, and equipment were carefully organized. Each item was a piece of the puzzle that could give the Allies an advantage in the Atlantic theater. Yet with every discovery came the awareness of responsibility. The Navy had ordered absolute secrecy, and for good reason. The intelligence they had recovered contained sensitive information about German operations and experimental weapons, material that Hitler would consider priceless. For over a year, the Navy kept the operation classified. Thousands of sailors who witnessed the boarding were sworn to silence. No letters home mentioned the daring raid, no reports in newspapers detailed the capture, and no public acknowledgement would come until after Germany's surrender. The mission became a shadow in history, known only to those who had risked their lives and the officers who understood its significance. David himself had to carry the weight of this secrecy, balancing the pride of accomplishment with the knowledge that the world could not yet know what had been achieved. The impact of the intelligence became apparent in subtle ways. Analysts pored over schematics and reports, understanding German patrol routes, secret supply chains, and experimental projects. Every intercepted U-boat communication could be contextualized with the information they had recovered. The operation had provided a rare glimpse inside the inner workings of the Kriegsmarine, revealing strategies, tactics, and the hidden ambitions of the Nazi command. What had seemed like a single daring act of bravery became a decisive contribution to Allied efforts across the Atlantic. The boarding party's heroism was undeniable, yet unspoken. Stories circulated quietly among the crew, shared in whispers during long watches, but the wider world would not hear of their courage until much later. David reflected on the moment, understanding that their actions were more than a tactical victory. They were a testament to discipline, bravery, and the extraordinary human capacity to face fear with calculated resolve. Each man aboard the Pillsbury had been part of something monumental, something that required trust, skill, and courage beyond imagination. As the U-boat finally slipped beneath the waves, the boarding party could only watch from a distance, knowing that what they had captured mattered far more than the vessel itself. The Atlantic reclaimed the metal hull, but not the secrets it carried. Those secrets were now in American hands, and their careful, disciplined handling ensured that the intelligence could be used to save lives, disrupt enemy operations, and shorten the war. The mission was complete, but its significance would ripple for months, influencing decisions far from the churning waters where it began. David and his men returned to their duties, but the memory of the boarding lingered. Every sound of a ship creaking, every alarm, every distant echo of the ocean reminded them of the narrow margin between triumph and disaster. They had acted with precision under the most extreme conditions, securing secrets that few could have imagined, and proving that courage, intelligence, and teamwork could overcome even the most impossible odds. The silence they were sworn to maintain was not just secrecy, it was respect for the magnitude of what they had achieved, a quiet acknowledgement that the world would one day understand the stakes, the risks, and the heroism that had unfolded in the Atlantic that fateful day.
The Atlantic had swallowed the U-boat, but the story of what had happened aboard the USS Pillsbury was far from over. Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David and his 8-man team had returned with intelligence that would quietly yet profoundly shape the course of the Atlantic War. The treasures they carried were not gold or jewels, but documents, schematics, and equipment that gave the Allies insight into the inner workings of the Kriegsmarine. Every chart, every diagram, Every piece of machinery had the potential to save lives and turn the tide of naval battles. On board the Pillsbury, there was no celebration. The men had risked everything, faced impossible odds, and returned with history in their hands. Yet orders were strict, silence above all. 3,000 sailors who had witnessed the boarding swore to keep the mission secret. No letters home described it. No newspaper would ever report it until the war ended. The world would not know of the courage displayed that day, but the Navy understood the significance. They had witnessed what had not been done by any American crew in over 129 years. Analysts immediately began studying the recovered materials. German patrol routes, experimental weapons designs, and intelligence codes were pieced together, providing the Allies with a rare glimpse into the enemy's strategies. Convoys could be rerouted, U-boat hunts made more efficient, and attacks planned with information that had previously been impossible to obtain. Every operation that followed carried the invisible imprint of the Pillsbury's daring boarding. It was a ripple effect, unseen by the world, but decisive in the theater of war. For David, the weight of the mission lingered. He reflected on the bravery of his team, on the meticulous precision with which they had moved through the sinking submarine. It was not only courage, but discipline, intelligence, and teamwork that had carried them through. Each sailor had been part of something extraordinary, a mission where success required every ounce of skill and nerve they possessed. Their heroism was silent, hidden, but it was historic nonetheless. Even years later, the boarding remained a benchmark in naval history. The mission demonstrated that audacity, combined with preparation and intelligence, could achieve the impossible. It was a lesson for the Navy, a story of how ordinary men, trained in extraordinary ways, could confront danger that seemed insurmountable. The intelligence they secured not only contributed to Allied victories, but also preserved lives by enabling safer, more informed operations against U-boats. The legacy of that day was not only in the documents or the equipment, but in the example it set. David and his men had shown what was possible when courage met opportunity, when fear was acknowledged but not allowed to dictate action, and when discipline guided audacity. Their actions became a quiet legend, whispered among sailors, studied by officers, and remembered by those who understood the stakes. History often remembers the battles, the ships, and the commanders, but some stories remain hidden, classified for decades, until the world is ready to understand the sacrifices and brilliance behind them. The boarding of the U-boat by the USS Pillsbury was one of those stories. It was a testament to human courage, to the skill and bravery of men willing to risk everything for a mission that seemed impossible. The Atlantic would continue to rage, and the war would continue to demand courage. But the boarding of that U-boat stood as a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of almost certain death, extraordinary deeds could be achieved. It was a mission that changed the course of events quietly, yet decisively. David and his team returned to their duties, humble, disciplined, and forever part of a secret chapter in history. Their courage, their precision, and their determination became a legacy, a silent beacon for generations of sailors who would follow in their wake, proving that sometimes the most heroic actions are those the world never hears about.